This episode of the After Act Show is heavily based on the book For the Glory, Olympic legend Eric Liddell's Journey of Faith and Survival by Duncan Hamilton. I highly recommend you give it a read.
The spectators of the Stade Olympique de Cologne cheer as the athletes approach the start line. The runners of all nations have come to compete. The crowd in the stadium have their eyes trained on one runner in particular. They have been impressed by his determination and grit, and his tremendous faith. His decision not to run in his favorite event of the 100 meters because it was held on the Sabbath has made international headlines. Some call him a hero, others call him an idiot. Now, all eyes are on Liddell to see how he will run this race. Liddell is in his prime, age 22. He was favored to win the 100 meters. Now, lining up for the 400 meters, everybody watches in anticipation of how Liddell will perform. As the racers approach their lanes, Liddell walks over to each one of his opponents to shake their hands. On your marks. Get set.
That, however, was a long time ago. 20 years to be precise. Those Olympic Games were now a distant memory. Memories of perhaps a more pleasant time. The spectators of Weishen internment camp cheer as the inmates approach the start line. Though internees of several Western nations have gathered to compete, the crowd in the prison courtyard have their eyes trained on one runner in particular. They have been impressed by his determination and grit, and his tremendous faith. His decision not to leave China after the Japanese invaded was known to all his fellow inmates. Some call him a hero, others call him an idiot. Now all eyes are on Liddell to see how he'll run this race. Liddell looked like a ghost, aged 42. He used to be the fastest of all the inmates. Now, lining up on the prison grounds, everybody watches in anticipation of how Liddell will perform.
On your marks. Get set.
It was the last race Eric Liddell would run. James Liddell had journeyed 16,000 miles from his small village in Scotland all the way to China to take part in the mission in China. 12 months after James's arrival, his fiancée, Mary Redden, arrived in China as a nurse. It was in Shanghai in October of 1899 that the two would be married. The couple had married just in time to face severe persecution from the Boxers. During the height of the Boxer Rebellion, the Liddells fled from Chaoyang in northern China to Shanghai. It couldn't have been a more inopportune time as Mary was 7 months pregnant. She would have to ride in a sedan chair carried by 6 trustworthy Chinese Christians who risked their own lives in the process. It was in Shanghai while hiding from the Boxers that Mary gave birth to their first son, Robert. Having just started a family, nobody would have faulted the Liddells for leaving China and going back home to Britain. Yet the family decided to relocate to Tianjin after the Boxer Rebellion had ended. This was a bold move to say the least, as Tianjin was one of the cities that was most affected by the Boxers. James would leave to go to Mongolia, while Mary stayed in Tianjin. It was in Tianjin on October 16, 1902, that Eric Henry Liddell was born. The family moved yet again to Shaochang, where young Eric would grow up. He would eat Chinese food, dress in Chinese clothing, and even learn some Chinese. Around this time, Mary gave birth to the eldest daughter, Jenny. At the age of 5, the Liddells decided to move back to Scotland. James had shared the exciting news with Eric, telling him that they were going home. This comment had confused young Eric. He had known no other home but the one in Shaochang. Young Eric had always considered China to be his home. Even as a child, Eric strived to be like his father. He had decided to become a missionary at the age of 8. Eric supplemented his Bible classes with daily reading of scripture. He was confirmed in the Scottish Congregational Church at the age of 15. Even at such a young age, those around Eric had nothing but positive things to say about him.
He's the ideal of Christian brotherliness. He possesses such a big heart. He gains true satisfaction only when doing something for others.
It was also around this time that Eric demonstrated his prowess in athletics. Both Little brothers were the top athletes in the school, so much so that the school championship was given the name the Little Games. It would have struck the audience as humorous to see Eric run. There, Eric's signature arm flailing and head tilting backward were on full display. Those who saw it mocked his running style, calling it like a startled deer or a windmill. Little would go on to study medicine at Edinburgh University, with the hopes of one day becoming a medical missionary. There he continued his athletics while studying. His coach attempted to fix Little's running style, but eventually gave up. Why fix something that looks wrong when Little was the fastest man in the school? Little began to compete in running events all around Scotland. There he demonstrated his athleticism to the national audience. The prizes Little won in these events were quite valuable: gold watches, silverware, valuable household items, and chinaware. The majority of these Little gave away. Although he was beginning to make a name for himself on the track, Little's true calling was in the church. Little's first opportunity to preach came on April 6, 1923, a day which Little describes as the day which his life changed. D.P. Thompson was an evangelist who was primarily focused on reaching the working class of Scotland. His efforts to reach these labor-hardened factory men were not fruitful. In the past, Thompson had worked for C.T. Studd, a famous cricketer who had gone to China with the China Inland Mission. Studd was able to persuade men to come listen to his message by using his athletic credentials. Anybody who went to listen to Studd preach had the opportunity to meet and shake the hand of one of England's finest cricketers. Thompson saw that Little had the potential to become the next C.T. Studd. Little was already a well-known athlete throughout Scotland. Perhaps Eric's sprinting fame would be able to convince some of the workers to give up a pub crawl on a Friday night. Little thought about it for a moment. He had never given a public speech in the past. To do so now, to a crowd of rowdy factory workers, seemed daunting. After a long silence, Eric replied with an assertive, "All right." The next morning, Eric received a letter from his sister Jenny, living in Tianjin. It was a passage from Scripture, Isaiah 41:10.
"Fear not, for I am with thee. Do not dismay, for I will guide thee."
The letter, perhaps written months ago from China, was the motivation Eric needed to convince himself that God was shaping the path in front of him. God was calling him, and this was Little's time to step up. A group of 60 to 80 hardy Scottish factory men had gathered to hear Little preach. The public had at the time not yet known that Little was a devout Christian. The sermon was Little's public exclamation to the world that he was a preacher and disciple of Christ. The next morning, every newspaper in Scotland had the story of Little's sermon in Armadale. There was no more going back. Little would later say that preparing that sermon and then delivering it to such a rough crowd was the bravest thing he had ever done. It would become less and less frightening for Little as he and Thompson continued to preach to the unchurched all around Scotland. Little's style of preaching was unique. He had a way of preaching that seemed to the audience that he was speaking directly to them. This was in contrast to the brazen fire and brimstone style of preaching that was so common in that day and region. So common that most people found the sermons boring and uninteresting. Ironically, it was Little's calm, unsensational preaching that captivated people. Little did not have any of the pomp and circumstance that most preachers did. He spoke in short sentences and used simple words. His largely blue-collar audiences found his sincerity captivating. They did not perceive a hint of arrogance in the man when he preached. Little knew that to be sincere was virtuous and bright in the eyes of God. He disliked the so-called pious and preachy Christians that so often lined the church pews.
One finds many people about whom it is rightly said, "If this is a typical example of a Christian, I am jolly glad I am not one."
He expanded on this idea of sincerity during one of his sermons.
If we allow cracks and blemishes to appear in our faith and then ignore them or attempt to cover them up, we aren't being truly sincere. We must strive to make our faith the perfect work. We are then sincere to ourselves and sincere to God.
Little had found his calling through preaching, yet another, very different calling was just ahead. The Paris Olympics were mere months away. Little was not a contender to participate in the Olympics. Though he was a household name in Scotland, nobody south of Hadrian's Wall had heard of him before. That is until Little won the 1923 AAA sprint at Stamford Bridge. His win made his name known to the wider English public, including one Harold Abrahams. Now there was no way that the British Olympic Association could pass Little up. The Olympic running team, which was made up of all Englishmen, would be rounded out by a Scot. Little's enthusiasm to compete in the Olympics was immense. So much so that he decided to drop his favorite sport of rugby to focus on running and reduce the risk of injury. That enthusiasm would be quashed one November morning when Little received the schedule for his events. The 4x100 meter relay, the 4x400 meter relay, and most importantly, the 100 meters were all to be held on Sunday, the Lord's Day. For many people, the dilemma would be difficult to overcome, but not for Little. He knew that there was only one thing to do.
There can be no neutrality where Christianity is concerned. Each one comes to the crossroads at some point of his life and must make his decision for or against his master.
Little informed the British Olympic Association of his resignation from the 100-meter race. The BOA tried everything to convince Little to compete on a Sabbath. Some of these attempts are humorous and pitiful. For example, Little was informed of the so-called Continental Sabbath, where Sabbath in France ended at noon. This would allow Little to compete in the race, which was held in the afternoon. Little retorted succinctly, "My Sabbath lasts all day." The association then tried appealing to God.
Since God has made you fast, wouldn't you be doing God's will by competing? And wouldn't it be a slight against him if you didn't?
Little wouldn't budge. The unbelievers of the BOA did not and could not comprehend his decision. And neither could the British public. After the newspapers ran the story, Little could hear people shouting, "Traitor to the nation," outside of his room. Little hadn't expected his decision to cause such an uproar. Some of the words uttered to him hurt him deeply. Some people did defend him. A minister compared his decision to the decision made by Daniel. Daniel's refusal to bend the word of God landed him in the lion's den. Little had been tossed into the metaphorical lion's den of the angry British populace. It would be no easy task to transform a professional sprinter into a half-mile runner. Little had only 5 months to complete this transition. Eric practically had no experience running at this distance. Many critics claimed that he simply did not have the right build. But Little's coach, Tom McKercher, believed that he had just as much stamina as he did speed. McKercher didn't hesitate to totally switch up Little's training regimen. Little had to face the real possibility that all of this training was in vain. The odds of him winning the race were slim at best. It was unclear to Little why he would be competing in the first place. However, Little seemed to find solace in a motto he later adopted. In the dust of defeat, as in the laurels of victory, there is a glory to be found if one has done his best. To Little, accepting that there was glory to be had in losing honorably gave him his motivation to run. Add to that the fact he had to prepare for final exams, it was quite a lot for any man to overcome. As the event came ever closer, critics were still finding ways to hurl mocking insults at Little's decision. Even late as it is, it may yet be possible for Eric Little to correct his fault at looking to the sky instead of to the track 10 yards ahead. The heat died down after Harold Abrahams won the gold in the 100 meters. The unrelenting British media shifted its focus towards Abrahams and other British athletes. The break in media attention allowed Little to focus solely on running. Little was also placed in the outside lane, the worst lane, as it would be impossible to see where all the other racers were. Just before the finals, a masseur passed him a note. In the old book it says, "He that honors me, I will honor. Wishing you the best of success always." It was all the confidence boost Little needed. If you are enjoying the episode so far, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing the video with your friends. Thank you for your support. A massive crowd of patriotism met Eric Little as he arrived in London. The public had been following the games through the radio, which allowed for near instantaneous updates on the games. Little's graduation was coincidentally 6 days later. The ceremony became an Olympic celebration. Little had not only won the 400 meters, he had done so by smashing the previous Olympic record. Little himself was not very interested in any of the celebrations. He had one thing on his mind. Sponsors quickly lined up to offer him deals, none of which Little accepted. Daily letters of admiration came in, and people pointed at him as he walked the streets. Little didn't care for any of the fame. Eric had his mind set on China. The promise that he made as a boy would not be forgotten. Little always thought about his family in China. When people asked him whether he would compete in the 1928 Olympics, Little will always respond with a maybe. Yet, deep down he knew that it would be exceedingly difficult to continue his training in China. As people proclaimed that Little would defend his gold in Amsterdam, Little had already sailed to Tianjin. The Anglo-Chinese College in Tianjin was a school for wealthy Chinese students. There, Little taught math and science. He also taught the boys athletics. Yet his heart's desire was to follow in the footsteps of his father, to become a missionary. In 1932, Little went back to Scotland and was ordained into the Congregational Union of Scotland. When he returned to Tianjin, Little married Florence Jean Mackenzie, daughter of Canadian missionaries. The newlyweds were happy as can be and built a house for the new family in Tianjin. They wouldn't enjoy their new lives for very long, though. Ever since the overthrow of the Qing dynasty, China was in a constant state of turmoil. Stories of skirmishes between communists, nationalists, warlords, and bandits were nothing new. What was new were the never-before-seen bombers droning overhead. One day, while walking through Tianjin, Little heard what he thought to be fireworks. The explosions grew louder and louder. Death was raining from the sky as 28 Japanese bombers hovered over Tianjin. A merciless siege of 4 hours caused several hundred casualties. Even after the raid was over, fires raged throughout the city. Soon after, Tianjin fell to Japanese occupation. The foreign concessions were left alone. Japan did not want to provoke the fury of the Western powers. Yet. Little could have easily gone back to Britain, yet he chose not to. He did not want to be perceived as talking a big game, then bouncing at the first sight of trouble. It would not be a good look for Little if he abandoned the very people he was trying to help. Despite all the bloodshed around him, Little was determined to go to Xiaochang, the village he spent 5 years as a child in. He would follow in his father's footsteps, and nothing would stop him. Not even a world war. Going from Tianjin to Xiaochang was not easy. Eric was joined by his brother Robert on his journey through the war-torn Chinese countryside. On the journey, the brothers endured several bandit raids and witnessed the poverty and suffering of the people. Their lives would not improve upon reaching their destination. Sporadic rifle fire would often disturb the eerily silent streets of Xiaochang. Japanese soldiers would conduct raids to rob what little was left in the village. The other missionaries told Little that there were many other unspeakable atrocities that had been committed. Although the suffering is unimaginable, Little had this to say about his decision to go to Xiaochang. I have more joy and freedom in the work than I have ever experienced before. It is wonderful to feel one with the people. The people of Xiaochang loved Little, in large part due to the work of James Little. Affectionately calling Eric Pastor Lee, the villagers often deferred to him for advice. Oftentimes, Little could be heard humming "Be Still My Soul" in Chinese. The lyrics of the hymn were particularly applicable to the situation Little faced. Little treated everybody with utmost respect, including the invading Japanese soldiers. Oftentimes, his kindness and openness threw off the Japanese soldiers, who were doing their best to try and annoy the missionaries to leave Xiaochang. This state of affairs couldn't last. Britain had declared war on Germany in 1939, an ally of Japan. Soon, the already poor attitude of the Japanese grew increasingly hostile. Little and the other missionaries decided to move back to Tianjin. Yet, Tianjin was fast becoming no safer than Xiaochang. The Littles made the difficult decision for Florence to return to Canada. Eric would stay with the Chinese, whom he called his people. It would be the last time they would see each other. The situation changed yet again on December 7th, 1941, a day which lives in infamy. Japan attacked not only Pearl Harbor, but also British Malaya, Singapore, and Hong Kong. For Little, being British was no longer a guarantee of safety. Little was hauled off to Wei Shen internment camp. No place may be as hopeless as an internment camp. It is hard to find meaning when living itself is meaningless. Yet, Little was as cheery as ever. The camp eventually settled into a routine, assigning tasks to various inmates. One of Little's campmates was 80-year-old Herbert Hudson Taylor, son of Hudson Taylor. The children of the camp would often go to Uncle Eric. Almost as if he was named for the role, Eric Little would never turn away one of the little ones. Little also made an effort to pray for the camp guards. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. The situation in the camp would not improve. Not fast enough anyways. Little was beginning to deteriorate under the conditions. He ran what would be his final race in his life, a race which he lost. The amount of weight Little was losing was alarming. One night, Little suffered a stroke. His good friend rushed to his room to see him. She heard one final sentence before Little left the earth. its complete surrender. Little was pronounced dead on February 21st, 1945. A tumor in the left brain had gone undetected by the camp's medical staff. 6 months later, Hiroshima and Nagasaki would be vaporized. The camp would be liberated by American paratroopers on August 17. Had Little survived 177 days longer, he would have lived to see freedom once more. By the time you are hearing this, you will have known who the 2024 400-meter Olympic champion is. I congratulate the winner, who will inevitably draw comparisons with Eric Liddell. That person may perhaps forever live in the shadow of one of the greatest men to live. Or perhaps he will surpass Eric. Only God knows. Interestingly, the 100-meter race in Paris is yet again held on a Sunday. It seems there will be no Sunday boycotters this year. I must admit, the making of the script for this episode was exceedingly difficult. I am not exaggerating when I say that a 3-hour-long episode would not be sufficient to cover the life of Eric Liddell. Many life events had to be cut to make the episode an acceptable length. As I researched more about Liddell's life, many times I thought to myself, this cannot possibly be true. How can a man of such character honestly be believed to have existed? It may be bold of me to say, but I cannot think of a more Christ-like character outside the Bible than Eric Liddell. After finishing my research, I was left with a deep internal dread. Studying Liddell's life gave me a profound sense of unworthiness. My own failings shine glaringly in the face of such saintliness. Yet I must remind myself that the God who made Eric Liddell who he was is also the same God who allows us to become who we are. May the story of Eric Liddell be carried on for another 100 years. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of The After Act Show. You can contact me by leaving a comment in the comment section or by emailing me at theafteractshow@gmail.com. You can find the sources used in the episode description. Thank you to the artists who made the sounds and music used in the episode. You can find links to their works in the description as well. If you like the episode, why not give the video a like and subscribe to the channel? You'll get notified whenever a new episode is released. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.